right. The war, the bakery war. The war, what kind of war? Bakery war that explains England's deepest divide. We're going to dive right into this one. Welcome back to the channel, one and all. Let's get into this video. Link in the description below. Go show them some love. Here we go, baby.
This is a map of every Greggs in England, the country's go-to bakery for cheap sausage rolls. And at first, it's not exactly surprising. It seems that everyone loves them. But everything changes when you see it per person. The infamous Greggs density map. Now there's a divide. Greggs in the north, and in the south another chain with an exotic European vibe emerges. Pret. On the surface this may seem trivial, just two different ways of buying lunch. But it speaks to something much bigger. A fault line which is dividing the country in half. It's not just bakeries where you see this pop up. Look at average incomes, housing costs, even voting patterns. And the same line appears every time. The most deprived towns in the UK, places which look like this, or this, are also up north. Now, no one's saying living near a Greggs makes you poorer, but there's a reason that nearly all of the Prets in the UK are centred in London. Because where both of these shops thrive often tells the story of who's surviving and who's been left behind. The real
now I get it. England's deepest divide. So he said not that I'm saying Greggs are in the cheaper areas, but the Prets are in the high-end areas. That's what you say. Not that I'm saying, but that's what you're saying, because that's a definite divide every time. You said, look at the building, look at what you showed, the voting. You can see. Yeah.
Question isn't why Northerners love Greggs. It's why a bakery map can explain England's deepest economic fault line. Despite its cheap and cheery image today, Greggs began as a product of the wealth that once defined Britain's north. John Gregg opened his first bakery in Newcastle in 1939, back when the region still powered the country. This was the engine of Britain, and it gave rise to towns full of workers who needed quick, hearty meals. Greggs grew with that prosperity. From Newcastle, it expanded across the north, then in the 1970s began moving south, buying up bakeries in Glasgow, Leeds, Manchester, and eventually London and Kent. But as Greggs spread south, the country's fortunes moved in the opposite direction. The industries that once made the north rich began to collapse. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, and wealth started flowing toward the south. That's why this divide runs deeper than just a bakery map. It's the story of how England has changed from a unified nation to a country deeply divided. Some of you may be thinking,
that makes sense. When the infrastructure start breaking down, from the mining to shipyards and all of that, transportation back then, because that's a long time, 1939, that's back in the days. So you can understand it was booming then. So Greggs was everywhere within that area. But you can literally see the divide. But like he said, I jumped to conclusion when I said, but what did you just say? You're saying the opposite of what you just. But he's right. It was for the upper class. It was for those who had money when they opened. You see how crazy that is?
But this kind of divide happens everywhere. Italy has an infamous north-south divide, and Germany has east and west. But Britain is different. While this kind of divide has always existed in these countries, in Britain it just keeps on growing. No other G7 nation has such a steep drop in productivity and pay over just a short distance. Drive 2 hours north of London and you lose almost a third of GDP per person. The roots of that change go back to the Industrial Revolution, when Britain transformed from a rural nation into an imperial behemoth in just 200 years. Now, the north of England has always been rich in natural resources. Coal, gas, iron, all buried beneath its green and pleasant hills. And it was those fuels and minerals that turned the region into the centre of Britain's Industrial Revolution. And guess where all that fuel was? Up north.
Up north.
Now, when people talk about the north, no one actually agrees on where it begins. Some say it's anywhere above Watford, while others might say it's where your accent starts to change.
Tomorrow. It's tomorrow, not tomorrow.
But there aren't any fences or border signs that...
I love it. I love your accent. I don't care if I can't understand it, but I get where it's saying. The industrial age, things were booming. But that's a big drop in the difference between... Damn. Well, life changed. stuff changes and you gotta go with the flow, or you gotta change with the times. That's just how life is.
Clearly separate the so-called North from the so-called South, and yet everyone seems to still agree on the stereotypes that define each part. In Britain, even the accents tell you where the money flows. Northern voices are still tied to industry and grit, and the southern ones to sleek offices. And based on these social factors, plus some proper economic ones, Professor Danny Dorling from Oxford has actually tried to draw this invisible line. And this is what he came up with: a diagonal line running just above Warwick and Leicester. And it's probably the best border we have right now.
Oh.
So it was above this line, but really in this part of the country where things started to take off. This industrial revolution gave birth to new towns and completely transformed ones which already existed. Sheffield, for example, was once a quiet town of local steelmakers, which suddenly exploded into the heart of Britain's steel empire. Its annual production rose from 200 tons to 80,000 within decades, which was almost half of Europe's entire output at the time. They were so dominant that in 1871, the US imported 3 times as much rail track from Sheffield as it made domestically. All across the north, the same story was playing out, from cotton in Manchester to coal in Sunderland. By the late 1800s, around 40% of global manufactured exports came from Britain, with a large majority produced in these northern cities. Now, calling these areas rich because they had steel factories is a bit like calling China rich because they make iPhones. However, there was an undeniable knock-on effect for these areas. They gave people stable work, enough to raise a family on a single income. Now, without turning this into a Make England Great Again video, talking about bringing back manufacturing to English soil, there was a problem with all these sorts of jobs. The same system that made the North prosperous also made it fragile. The Industrial Revolution had made the North rich, but it also locked its workers into a way of working that would later trap them. Not that people knew it at the time. The very skills that made Britain's manufacturing world-class were also specific, hard to adapt, and impossible to transfer elsewhere. And that became a problem when the economy kept growing and wages also started to rise.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So it wasn't easy to adapt or to move over into something new, because what they did, it was tedious, but at the same time, it locks them into that specific thing that the job that they do. So they weren't able to move from that into something new. Interesting.
Good news for workers, bad news for businesses, and then also eventually bad news for workers. Every pay rise made British goods more expensive to produce, and by the late 1900s, wages in London were nearly double that of other major European countries, and almost 8 times higher than in China. So while British workers had become some of the best paid in the world, British goods had also become some of the most expensive to produce. While it might seem anti-national in hindsight, any ordinary business owner in the UK was desperately looking for ways to move their productions overseas. Most economists see this as a natural consequence of productivity gains and globalization, and that wasn't unique to Britain either. Every advanced economy went through it. Rising wages, foreign competition, and factories moving abroad. But in the UK, it hit harder and lasted longer. Because instead of gradually building new industries to replace the old ones, the country made a clean break. And that break came under a now infamous, deeply divisive figure, Margaret Thatcher. She decided that if Britain couldn't compete in factories, it would compete in finance. In the 1980s, Thatcher unleashed what was now known as the Big Bang, a sweeping deregulation of financial markets that transformed London almost overnight. Within just a few decades, services, that is, selling words instead of actual products, jumped from 22% of GDP in 1979 to over 70% by the 2000s. For anyone living in London, even if you didn't work in finance, you would have felt the gain. Your house price exploded, your wage probably went up, and you probably even had access to better shops and restaurants. But for the rest of the country, that transformation came with a cost.
That's crazy. That's a huge, from 22 to 70. That's a lot. But that makes sense, because when you get to that side, everything seems more expensive. You get more pay. Your house cost, so even if it was 20 cents back then, your house cost gone all the way to, 20 to about 90%. That's crazy. That's another 90. So you felt rich in that setting. So the North was losing so much. So when Thatcher did what she did, It yanked all of that wealth, all that was going on for the North. It was just cut off in the blink of an eye. And then now the South started booming and everything was up. But you can see the difference though from how the buildings and the shops and the setting was totally different. So it's like it was a business entity now. You're in your suits and jeez.
Because when all the money started flowing into London, it stopped flowing everywhere else.
Yep.
And it hit the north hard. After the shift, manufacturing went from making up around 30% of GDP to just 16%.
Damn.
Manufacturing jobs collapsed from 7.1 million in 1980 to only 4.4 just 10 years later. The sad part was these weren't unskilled jobs. Some required over a decade to train for, but they just weren't needed anymore or could be done cheaper in other countries. Because the skills were so technical, workers couldn't easily switch to other jobs, and the majority were left without a place in the new economy. The rise of services, finance, and other tech also created far fewer jobs, but each one paid a lot more. And the problem was, almost all of them were in the South. By the 1990s, the Southeast alone held 5 more times of these types of jobs than the entire North combined. All that new money pouring into London didn't just reshape the skyline either. It changed what people wanted. Suddenly, there was a market for faster, fancier, and more global tastes. And in 1984...
That makes sense. You see how things change? People don't say, okay, I want to do mining. Oh, I don't want to build. You understand? But it's so sad that it took them so long to learn these jobs. And then it's like they were just discarded. They have no use for them in a different area. It's not like they couldn't transfer from this job into the city, into a different position because it wasn't available. And now, back in the North, that one job, because they were able to provide and do everything on one family, one income coming in, and it could take care of the whole family. Now that just deteriorates the breakdown of the family in the North as well, because they weren't making any, they were jobless, all that infrastructure and everything was there. The demand wasn't coming in like it used to. Jeez, that's crazy. When you sit here and look at how things change, and it changed so rapidly, so fast, it was like boom, boom, and then London was the it, and it gotta be rough. It had to have been rough for those who was used to something else, and then it's like the blanket has just been yanked from underneath them.
Right in the middle of this boom, a small shop opened in Victoria to sell something the city had never seen before: fresh, ready-made sandwiches.
Look at that.
It was called pret-a-manger. This might seem like a small detail, but the timing and location of that first pret capture Britain's wider shift perfectly, from industry to finance and production to consumption. Today, more than 75% of Pret's 400 plus stores are in London, and that concentration didn't just stop at bakeries. Ever since the era of deindustrialization, an estimated 3 million people have moved from northern regions down to the south, most of which are under 35, educated and relatively skilled. Today, workers in the south produce nearly 30% more output than the north. The people who might have started businesses to drive innovation or growth in the north and created jobs there end up doing that in the south instead. George Orwell once called England the most class-ridden country under the sun, and in many ways that hasn't changed. It's just that now class is geographic. This is where it's kind of a tricky call. Depending on who you ask, and yes, where you ask in the country, people will either love or absolutely hate Margaret Thatcher. In some ways, she had a point. Britain would have had to deindustrialize anyway. There was no stopping the inevitable wave of globalization.
I get what you're saying, and I've did a video on her, and the comment section wasn't pretty. Majority in my comment section was like, she was this, she was that, she damaged, she this, she that. So yeah, he's right. Some might love, some will hate, and I saw it in the comment section and how they portray her too. When you hear it in these videos, you'll be like, she's like, she ruled with an iron fist. It's either her way or no way at all. But I get what he's saying. Yes, there had to be a change in order for the economy to boom, but the way she did it, based on how when you look from the north to the south, it could have been done a different way. not as like yanking the blanket from underneath the north and just shutting down stuff because it was more expensive to produce stuff. And I get that. That's why they always outsource a lot of things, because they can get it for
undermining British labour. But she also did it so suddenly and so harshly that it left scars which seem irreplaceable. Her ideology was so rigid that instead of reinvesting to modernise the North, she turned the whole country against public investment altogether.
Ridiculous.
When the mines closed, towns and cities collapsed. Her rhetoric about the nanny state bred deep scepticism of government spending. And it wasn't just ideological, it was cruel. It demonised individuals, and the result was catastrophic for the north of England. Those who stayed faced declining wages, poor housing, chronic illness, and rising crime. 15 years after the financial crash, the poorest regions in Britain are no better off, and that's unlikely to change. The numbers are grim. Poverty rates are 5 points higher in the north. Job growth since 2004, less than 1% in the north, compared to 12% in London in the south. Since 2000, over 300,000 northern graduates have moved south. Nearly half of young people in the north plan to leave, and only a fraction want to stay anywhere up north. Health is also worse too, and it matters. Around 30% of the north-south productivity gap is down to poorer health, and fixing it could add £13 billion to UK GDP. Life expectancy is also lower, and kids are more likely to grow up in low-income families, need free school meals, and leave school with worse grades.
Isn't that something, man? Jesus, I tell you, a lot of times when you stop to think about the decisions that politicians make, you wonder, man. And then you stop to think, okay, where were the other persons behind them saying, listen, if you do this, this is going to happen, or let's put this in place so that people don't suffer. Though I always wonder why do people allow certain things to happen? But because like I said earlier, it's like she just yanked the blanket from underneath them and then things went left. See, look at that. All the younger, 35, just look at the generation. 35 and younger moving to the south. Nobody's investing. Nobody's taking the time out to say, okay, let me stay in the north. But you cannot blame them either. You understand where they're coming from? Because there's no progress. Everything is the poverty line is just from it, and it's a chain reaction because it affects everybody in the north, and it affects you in every way you can think of. And that's the sad reality of any nation when they do stuff like that. It's crazy. But you see what he did? That where they placed that first place where you could get ready done meal right away in London, that was a smart idea right there.
Your future is simply brighter if you live in London, and that's the tragedy. While regional inequality in most developed nations has stayed flat for decades, in the UK, it's only widened since the 1970s.
Crazy.
A simple search on a job site like Indeed will show almost any decent paying job almost exclusively in London. You don't need just statistics to see this divide. You've only got to walk along a high street, and if the shops are open, you'll see the difference. Greggs versus Pret, Primark versus Zara, and Aldi versus Waitrose. So what can be done about it? If you've made it this far into the video, then I assume you've probably somewhat liked it. But more importantly, you probably already had some preconception about the north-south divide. We're not exactly reinventing the wheel here, and politicians also know how much people care about this. We've had slogan after slogan, the Northern Powerhouse under George Osborne, or Levelling Up under Boris Johnson, each one promising to finally turn the North into a new economic engine.
Never happened.
But then nothing really changes. The North stays poor and the South stays rich. So why doesn't it work? Well, the truth is that those plans were never truly built on equal ground in the first place.
Never.
The South already had the population, the money, even the people who pass all the laws, and that gravity pulls everything else in. London alone gets around £12,000 of public investment per person, compared to just 8k in the north. Of course, London does have far higher levels of poverty, crime and unemployment than, say, a country village, so a higher spend may seem reasonable. But the UK really needs to stick to its agenda of levelling up. Of course, London is where the big projects go. The Crossrails, the Elizabeth lines, even HS2, the big shiny project that was supposed to bridge the divide, ended up deepening it even further. The parts linking London were built first, polished and finished, but the parts meant to connect Birmingham and Manchester and Leeds cancelled, And once again, the South gets another piece of infrastructure, while the North is left with a broken promise.
Yep.
Greggs and Pret are not just about taste.
And that is always the case. And that is why you cannot put your trust into politicians. It's that simple. You got to do for yourself and your family and hope for the best and work for the best for you and your family. Because it's crazy when he said that, because I'm like, they were promised. Listen, we're going to invest. We're going to do this. We're going to put different infrastructures here in the North. And that did not take place. So there you go. It's like vain promises when they need to be elected, and it never follow through. And for me, I think one of the things that people tend to do, even though they get these vain promises, even though it didn't fall through, they still go back and put these people. But here we go between these two companies and the big.
They're about gravity. When money, talent, and attention cluster, they pull everything into their orbit. London is not just richer. It sets prices, priorities, and even identities for the rest of the country.
Yeah.
That is the principle hiding in this bakery map. Economies concentrate until something pushes back. Why this matters to you is simple. Where you live silently edits your opinions, your wage, your commute, your health, your child's school, your odds of starting a business. None of that is neutral. It's the product of a system that rewards the already central and starves the peripheral. So the next question is not Greggs or Pret. It's whether Britain can build a second centre of gravity. Not a slogan or an ecosystem. Fast trains between northern cities, R&D that stays where it starts, and tax and procurement that seeds whole supply chains. If it doesn't, the logos on the high street will keep telling the same story.
Yeah. Damn, that's crazy. But he's spot on with what he said. Based on his explanation, I get what he's saying. But will there ever be a change? There will never be a change. In the world that we're living in today, it's not just the UK. It's everywhere you go. It's every country that you go to. It's like, that's always the case. One side is booming and the other side is just going to the north. And then the vain promises that been constantly constantly being given out, said, listen, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to fix this, we're going to do that, so you can at least start pulling your socks up, or things can start to flourish back in the north or south or wherever it is in whichever country it is. But that was never, and that has never been the case. They have never followed through. It's always, I'll do this, I'll do that, whatever. All major stuff always tend to go to the side that is flourishing. And history has repeated itself again and again and again and again. And people still fall for these promises. I don't get it, you know. But it's the world that we're living in. It is what it is. You put up your socks and you carry on. It's that simple. That's crazy. But it's good when you look at the pairs and Greggs, however you say it. I'm sorry if I'm spoiling it. I like the fact that, okay, the North didn't work out. They started there, but guess what? It is still affordable. When you look at certain companies, they're for the people. They strive in a certain area because they're for the people. If they weren't for the people, they would have gone out of business a long time ago. That's how I see it. Very interesting video. It's the Island Girl and I'm running out of here. Be good, be kind, be safe out there. Love each other. You know, appreciate what you have. Appreciate life. Smile with your next door neighbor. Catch you guys in another one. Don't forget to give this one a big thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you're new here. When you give a big thumbs up, it tells YouTube that you like the content, and leave your request in the comment section. Love you guys. Bye.